So here's a Photoshop bonus video. This thing doesn't look terrible by any means, but at the same time, compared to what it's going to look like after we do a bit of post-processing, it's going to be night and day. Just absolutely night and day. And as being a professional or amateur, hobbyist, whatever, as being a 3D artist and wanting to improve, post-processing is going to be the #1 thing to really make your artwork stand out. So even if you're not using Photoshop, I would definitely suggest using some sort of 2D image manipulation software to really make your renders pop out a bit more. But anyways, once you're here in Photoshop, all we need to do is, well, we're going to take the layer 0, that's just the base layer, right? We're going to press Ctrl J, that's going to make a duplicate layer, so now any changes we make, it'll be non-destructive, so we can always get back to this base layer here. Right now, this is just a copy. And this is a bonus video. This is not something that's technically part of the course. This is just something we wanted to include for fun to help you out. So anything we use in here, we're going to be using some Photoshop plugins and things like that. And we're going to be showing you our own personal workflow here. So if you if you don't have all the same plugins here, you can usually get around them doing your own experimentation. But I want to make sure we are as genuine as possible with this presentation and how we approach the Photoshop post-processing. So off the bat, I'm going to go up here to Filter and then Camera Raw Filter. I'm going to click on that. Wait for it to load, and then we're going to have a few different settings here. I'm not going to mess with temperature or tint. There's just a few specific ones I'm going to mess with. So it's looking a little bit dull and not too bright right now, so we can bump up the exposure just a tad to just bring it out a bit more. So maybe 0.2 or 0.25. 0.25 looks good. I'm going to leave the contrast because I'm going to actually use the knit collection to do contrast. Highlights we can bump down just a bit, nothing crazy, just a little bit. Shadows we can, let's see. So for shadows, I'm just going to bump these a bit as a matter of fact. So just pull these up a tad, maybe +10. The whites we definitely want to drop the whites a bit. So maybe around here. And texture and clarity I usually crank up. As you can see, if I increase this, the texture and the clarity, it makes the gun look more detailed, but I actually don't want to do that because it affects the entire scene. I want to have a little bit more control and paint this straight over the weapon instead. So to paint on certain areas you want to work with, you go to the paintbrush tool right here, and you can basically paint any of these adjustments in specific areas. I just want to paint a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, and we'll also pump the shadows a bit more. Nothing crazy, maybe like +14 or +19 or something, not too high but not too low. And then all we have to do is go in here and just kind of paint over the areas we want to make clearer. So we just go in here carefully and we just paint across and get this detailed. Now I think it's an illusion, but usually when you paint you don't see a difference. But if you undo the change and then redo it, you're going to see how much that really made the weapon pop. And most of the time when you're actually painting these effects, you don't even notice it, which to me is interesting. I think it's more of an illusion than anything. But yeah, this is really just going to make things pop, and it overall just looks a lot better. It brought out the shadows a bit more, it brought out some more of the texture and clarity, and this thing is just looking a lot nicer now. So we can probably leave this. Now we're going to add a vignette at some point, probably towards the end. So I'm going to click OK, and now you can see the difference here. This is the before, and this is the after. You can see this is popping a lot more. This looks a lot nicer. Okay, so the next thing I like doing is going over to infinite color. This is actually something Ryu introduced me to, and I've been using it ever since. It's super useful. It's a plugin for Photoshop. And I'm just going to click on light because I don't want any sort of crazy amounts of color changes, and then I'm just going to click create. And I just go through here until I get something that I like. So if it looks bad, just click create again. This one looks pretty good. We can keep going through and seeing what we like. So I'm just going to pause until I get a nice one. So this one looks quite nice. The only thing I don't like is it looks kind of washed out almost. Something looks off. So what I'm going to do, or what I usually do rather, is I go in here and just turn off and on just to kind of see where the culprit lies. So gradient map is making a huge difference here. Let's check selective color. Selective color is doing alright. Color balance doing alright, and curves should be doing fine. So really this gradient map's just causing a bit of grief, making this thing look, I don't know, a little bit off. You know what, before I actually run that infinite color, let me use some color balancing first. I want this to be more towards the cyan tones, or if not, maybe more towards the blues. I think the blues look quite nice, a little bit of blue and a little bit of cyan mixed, but nothing too harsh. You could probably hop in the shadows here and just irk that a little bit. Let's see. Okay, just a tad. Now let's try running infinite color again, just getting a little bit of mixtures in here. And I think this will just look a bit more natural once we find the right one. Here we go, finally found a decent one. Let me just go through selective color and gradient map. I'm going to leave both of those. Selective color, it's not quite where I want it. Let me try adjusting some of the blending modes here. Let's see, so luminosity, there's color, so that's color and this is normal. Normal, and swap that to color. It's not too bad. And you know, now we're looking a bit better here. I also want to, where is it? Let's hop back to layer 0. And I'm going to go over to the knit collection. This is another plugin for Photoshop. Like I said, we're just going to showcase our own personal workflow, and one that I've actually adopted a lot from Ryu when he was showing me a lot of his strategies for Photoshop. But Color Effects Pro, this just allows you to adjust the contrast a bit more, make it a bit nicer. And okay, this is the default render. Let me wait on that because I'm just going to end up merging everything before I do any adjustments in there. For now, what I think I'll do is just add in text. So I'm just going to click on the T panel here and drop in some text. So I'm just going to come in here and move the text somewhere in this area, not too big or anything. Let me change the text to, actually I can go up here and we'll just click on that, and I can just take a look at some of my different text here. I would do it over here, but in the last video I recorded I noticed that it was cut off on the video. But in here, these are just texts I got from dafont.com. You can just go search SciFi fonts and download them. Just restart Photoshop and you'll have something cool. So I have quite a few different ones that I tend to go to. Some of my favorites here are, what do we have? We have Space Age, we have Coalition. I like these two. Coalition's pretty cool, one of my favorites. So I'm just going to call this guy Scorpio F2. And let's just move it. I don't want it to be super imposing, but I also want it to be noticeable enough in the scene without being too intrusive. And then we can drop the fill a bit. Let me change the color here, maybe a little bit of a brighter tone, or you could make it silver. It just all depends what you're going for. Let's go for more of a grayish silver type of color, as a matter of fact, like that. And we'll adjust the fill some more, nothing crazy. Man, I can't decide which I want. This is one of the parts that annoys me most. Not because I don't enjoy it, but I can never decide if I want to go for more of a darker font or more of a lighter. I think a lighter in this case would fit the scene a lot nicer, so a lighter color with a bit less on the fill perhaps. And there we go, we have Scorpio F2. And maybe I'll just duplicate this, Control C and Control V. Put something up here, just call it like F2 Armaments. You can name this whatever you want. You can literally put whatever you want in these scenes to make it look interesting. Now if you do two different things of text, I tend to on one of them change the change the font. So I'll just go in here and do a different font to make it a little bit more balanced. So maybe Oasis, that's another one of my fonts I've downloaded. Actually that Ryu gave to me because I thought it was a cool font. And yeah, if you go to sometimes I go to ArtStation and see cool fonts. If you don't know what font it is, literally just message the people on ArtStation and just get yourself a cool collection of fonts. That's something that if you can't find cool fonts, then just use the ones other people use, you know? Just ask them, hey, what are you using? And make your stuff look as cool as theirs. So I need to definitely drop the fill on this guy, like a lot more. So that way it's not super balanced. That way there's more of a focus point on one of the texts. So something like that, something very slight. And maybe I'll just reposition this a bit. This guy should be a bit smaller, I think. Maybe a little bit taller. Wider. It's not too bad. And just something with these texts. I just can't decide how I want to position it. Usually you can tell if something looks off, and something looks slightly off, but off to the point where I'm like, it's almost there. So this looks a bit better, I think. I like this. You can also try swapping the fonts you're using, so maybe I'll go for this one, use Oasis. Let me find it. And you know what? Let me do it over here because the recording software is blocking it. So let's try Oasis down here, and let's try Coalition up here. See, I think something about this composition just looks nicer to me, so I'm actually going to leave it this way. It's not something I can explain, it's just something that I see more so. So now what I want to do is combine all of this into one single layer. And we're doing this because, like I showed before, if we try to do any filter settings, it does it on the base layer. So just the raw one, which as you can see looks terrible right now compared to this. So essentially, to combine all this into one layer, we select everything but the base layer. So we'll select this one and then shift select up to the top. And then we'll press Control-Alt-Shift-E, and that's going to combine everything into one layer, as you can see. And by the way, if you Alt-click on the eyeball icon, it'll hide everything but the one you're clicking. So Alt-click. And at this point, I'm going to go up here to Filter and run the Knit Collection. And we'll do a little bit of contrast adjusting as a final touch. Let me just bring this into view here so you can see it. There we go. So I'm going to go over to Pro Contrast. Now take a look what happens. If I click on Pro Contrast, it already cleans it up a bit. We can also correct the contrast up here just a tad, just a smidgen. And then for shadows you can see it's a very slight difference, but it definitely helps a little. We don't want to go too high or it just kind of blurs it. So just a little bit on shadows and just a little bit on that color contrast, and we'll click OK. And just wait for this to load in. Sometimes it takes a couple seconds, but you'll see when it pops in. There we go. Now it's a very, very subtle difference. If I were to turn this off and turn this on, very subtle but looks a bit better. So last thing I want to do is perhaps drop my signature down here somewhere. So I'm going to go with, actually I would just go and select this text. Geez, where is it? I'll just add in a new text. We'll do Coalition, and down here I'm just going to type in my name. I can't select the text because now we have this new layer, of course. Probably should have done this before, to be honest, but I just now realized, hey, my name's not down here. So, you know, add in your name, or in my case, Josh Gambrell, so that way, you know, you have a little bit of a signature on your work. It's always good to document your work. And we'll just get a very, very slight signature down here in the bottom right. You know, nothing too imposing, but enough so people can see, okay, here's who made the artwork. Okay, and you know what? There is one thing that is not that good about this. If we zoom out by alt scrolling really far, just look at this image. Tell me what hits your eye first. It's probably going to be a combination of either the glow here or the text. Probably the text though. And your text should not be, your eyes should not go to the text over the weapon. That just doesn't make sense. So this text is a little bit too bright for my liking, so we need to adjust that. So I'm actually going to backtrack just a tad. That'll actually be okay because now I can end up merging my name with all the layers as well. So say goodbye to these effects real quick because we need to delete them, unfortunately. So I'm just going to click on Scorpio F2, drop the fill just a bit so that way it's not as imposing. So it's still bright, but not bright enough to, maybe it is still bright enough. Let's try again. Let's drop the color a tad. There we go. Okay, that's a lot more manageable now. These are pretty balanced. I think we can deal with this over what it was before. And I guess I could have went over here and just used some basic Photoshop tricks to dim it, but just to keep it nice and consistent, at this point we're going to go back in, shift click all the layers including the new name layer, Control Alt Shift E, make a new one, and then I'm just going to run in here again really fast to Color Effects Pro. We'll run the Pro Contrast, give it a little bit of correction and a little bit of shadow improvements, and we'll click OK. Let it load, and then we should be good for this composite here. There it is. So there we go. Now we have a pretty cool looking composite. Nice and balanced, cool little blue background tint to it. So here's the before, here's the after. Just this original one just looks awful. You think when you render it in Blender, oh, this looks pretty cool, and then you do a post-process and you realize that it's just nowhere near as good compared to what you can make it. So at this point we're going to go up here to File, Save As, and I'm just going to save this as a JPEG, and you can just save this wherever you want. You should also save a Photoshop file in case you want to adjust it again later. You have access to it. So you can go to Save As and then choose a PSD and save that as well.